Hello, and welcome to another podcast, another episode, another exploration of themes, ideas. In this one, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of representation, more the philosophical sense of it. But in truth, it's more the social. It's really the social if we pay attention to how it's used, even the word, and especially how it's experienced in regular society. So this is the concept of the copy effect of representations. It's about ideas, systems, or even structures interact with a central theme. There's a dominant, predominant, fundamental stage at which all representations are in effect to provide details of that central theme. Now, in other works, we discussed how the central theme is just the core of consciousness, or the core of a city, or the core city. But we're not going to get into that. We're just going to suffice with simply the idea of it being a central theme. And how the further they stray from the center, the more they transform into something different, or maybe less effective. Sometimes more effective, sometimes necessary. Distance is good when it comes to representations. Too close is sometimes the recipe for disillusionment, stagnation. Imagine a central theme. It could be an idea, a principle, but especially in a dominant culture. Representations that are closer to the center, they stay more connected and relevant. But as you move away, what happens? These representations begin to lose that core connection. Instead of standing independently, they often end up mimicking or performing in a way that reflects the original representation. Instead of it being the representation, it mimics or represents for the representation. Rather than embodying the central theme, they go on effect to provide a vantage point, a perspective on the perspective. For example, think how corporations, they try to emulate the qualities of leading companies within their industry, but especially the leading industry. Rather than creating something entirely new or innovative, they might focus on perfecting their version of whatever exists, but they're doing only so as a representation of that representation. The results? They're not creating, they're copying. But not in the effect of copying in the negative connotation. They're providing something, just not the fundamental representation. This phenomenon isn't just limited to business. It's a societal, we're talking about the theme of representation. We see it in architecture. Buildings further from a city center, they try to replicate the essence of the central design, but more than the central design, the central representation. Even if the design is ineffective or lacks the modality of progressive architecture. We see it in social systems. Communities emulate cultural hubs, even individual behavior. The further you go from the source of originality, right? The more you had a creative idea in the morning or last month, everything that goes forward is mimicking or re-representing that creative instance. You cannot continuously innovate. You're rather recreating what already has been represented for yourself. When it comes to the personal, the psyche, I think a better word would be potential. We're talking about more structural themes in society, but so I don't want to go off track there. So why does this happen? The main factor is structure, both physical and social. The first border quote-unquote border, right, is closest to the center. Here, representations still carry the weight and influence of the central theme. But move out to the second border, and you're looking at representations of representations. You'll find this throughout. Place this study anywhere in a structural society, in a competent civilization, and you will notice this. Go further to the third or fourth borders, and these layers start to lose their connection to the core entirely, merely to provide that tier of representation to its degree. The further out you go, the harder it is to innovate, or more importantly, the harder it is to represent the core theme. The focus shifts from originality to perfecting the act of representation itself. Again, not a negative, only a different pathway approach. Let me give you an example. Imagine a second-tier representation. This could be a smaller community, a subgroup within a larger society, but especially within a first-tier society. Its role might seem independent, but in reality it's often borrowing from the first tier. The second-tier representations are those that understand the depth and nuance of the first tier, but they do it so well that they can offer something fresh. This is important. Something indispensable. I want to linger on that. Indispensable. That is the core validation, relevance to a representation of a representation. The second you move away from first tier, it is always about how indispensable is it. They add a new perspective without appearing tied to the original. This is no easy feat. It requires deep analysis, creativity, the ability to perform as though they're entirely independent. The key is subtlety. The best second-tier representations don't scream their connection to the first tier. They imply it through their depth and ingenuity. On the flip side, some second-tier representations don't quite get there. Instead, they become performative. They try to stand out. But without a nuanced understanding of the first tier, they end up borrowing surface-level traits rather than providing any meaningful contribution. Right? They're only taking the first-tier representation so they could have any social validation. For if they just... It actually would not be possible to do anything other than emanate from that representation. So even if subconsciously they perform like, no, we're unique and individual, independent entities, it is still the case that they will be following according to their tier of representation. What about the third tier? This is where things get even more interesting. Third tier representations often attempt to challenge or critique second tier systems. A side note here, it's not considered a third tier. A true third tier is simply the complete embodiment of a representation to a representation to a representation. That is all it's doing. It's doing the same actions as the second tier representation. And so there's no need to understand it more thoroughly. Once you understand second tier representations, you understand the further tiers.